Kat and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is filmed on my new Canon G7X vlogging camera that I recently bought. I have this beautiful pink background. Oh, and I have my ring light which I've forgotten to turn on, so bear with me a moment there. Okay, so that's better now that I've actually remembered to put on my ring light, and in hindsight maybe this pink eyeshadow wasn't the best colour to be wearing with this background because I'm guessing it kind of just blends in. But oh well, let's just go with it. In all seriousness, this is a subject that is close to my heart and it's something that I really wanted to make a video on. So I don't know where about in the world it is that you're watching from, but here in the UK we have a TV soap called Coronation, and right now one of the storylines that they're covering is OCD. I'm so proud of Coronation for covering this topic and for bringing awareness to the subject, and I am so proud of the actor Colson for his part in this as well. Like, he does an amazing job. Thank you all so much for doing such a fantastic job, for really doing this justice and bringing awareness to something that I live with every single day. Not many people really understand or get it, and a lot of people think that I'm just a weirdo. It's a real thing, it's a real problem, and it really does significantly impact our lives. And it's something that I didn't know I actually suffered with until maybe a couple years ago was when I first kind of realised that this is what I was dealing with. I always thought I was just a little quirky, a little strange, mostly because everybody told me that I'm quirky and strange, and I was always like, it's part of my charm, it's my thing, you know. I'm quirky and strange. I am all of those things, but there is actually a real reason behind why I do some of the things that I do. So in the clip in Coronation, Colson Smith's character Craig can be seen carrying out a series of specific patterns that he has to do, or things that he has to do, and if he doesn't do it then he feels like something bad is going to happen to him or somebody he loves. And there's one part in that scene where little Liam comes in and he's confronting Colson's character Craig about this, and he's like, why are you doing these things? Colson's character Craig says, because I feel like if I don't do them, something bad is going to happen to somebody I love and I have to protect them by doing these things. And the little boy Liam's like, well, that's stupid. And he's like, I know. He's like, you can't stop bad things happening by doing this. But he's like, I totally get it, basically, but I just can't help it. Like, and the little boy's like, well, just stop. And he's like, but I can't just stop. And I just thought that was so perfect, because a lot of people, when you tell them, oh, I do this and this is why I do it, they'll be like, well, just stop doing it. And it's like, it's not that simple. You can't just stop. You can't keep somebody safe by doing X, Y, and Z. That's just stupid. It's really important to emphasize the point that the person themselves is not stupid. They're highly intelligent. They understand that this is completely illogical behavior. However, that being said, the logic is stupid, but we just have to follow it. Like, we're compelled to do the things that it tells us to do, because we just feel like we can't. Like, we have to, because it holds hostage all those people that are dear to us, and even holds ourselves hostage. So in one of the clips, Colson's character Craig, he has an ironing board, and I think he starts off like lying it down, and then he walks away, and then he comes back and he's like, no, and then he has to like stand it up, and then he walks away. Now for me, that is something that I would do. It was so freaky watching that episode, because it was like watching a mirror image of myself. It may as well have been me in that clip. That was something that I would do. I would put, like, if it was me, like, I would put the ironing board down, I'd go away, turn around and be like, no, that's not quite right, and I'd have to come back and put the ironing board up, and then I'd go and walk away. But what I would do differently to Craig's character is that would not be enough for me. I'd then have to go back and put the ironing board into the position it was originally in. And then you see him, like, say he has to do like a series of things, and they have to just feel right, and he has to keep doing it until it feels right. Oh my gosh, it's like taking the words out of my mouth. So I remember once explaining this to my mother, and this was before I really figured out properly what it was, but I just said, I have these weird little rituals and things I have to do. And my mum's like, what do you mean? And I was like, okay, well, for example, my brain will tell me that something is going to happen, something bad is going to happen to somebody I love, unless I do a completely impossible task that is not humanly possible. Unless I do this before like a certain time is up, then something bad is going to happen to somebody I love. And I would be like, hey, like that's impossible, there's no way that I can do that, you're just setting me up to fail. So then OCD would say to me, okay, well, I'll let you off with that, we will cancel out that threat, I will negate that threat, but what you have to do is you have to take your palm and you have to rest it completely flat against the surface, like for example a wall. So I would have to take my palm here, and then like let's just imagine this is the wall, I would have to rest my palm perfectly flat against the wall, and it would have to be perfectly flat. Like it couldn't be a little squint, or you know, it just the surface of my palm here had to perfectly flatly touch like the wall, and I had to do this until it felt right. And it didn't matter how many times, I had to keep doing it, I just had to. Another little ritual that I had to do, I still have to do it sometimes, is so OCD will threaten me and I'll say, hey, here's something really important to you, or someone really important to you, and or you know, or something in your life that's really important, something that you hold dear, something you value, and I'm going to take that away from you, I'm going to hurt that person, like all these bad things, I'm holding this hostage unless you can take your two palms like this and you have to get them to touch each other, and they have to touch perfectly flat. So similar to like what I showed you with the wall, but instead of touching the wall perfectly flat, both palms have to touch each other perfectly flat. On top of that, it's not enough to just do that, they have to like align perfectly. It's difficult to see in the viewfinder here if I'm doing this perfectly, but like I couldn't do that. Like it had to be like, even that is not acceptable, it had to be like just, it's so difficult to use in the viewfinder. It had to be perfectly flat, and I had to do it until it felt right. Like I just had to keep doing it. And the other thing that it would make me do is, it would make me do this, but I had to get it on the first go. So on the first go, I had to be able to like line these up perfectly, make them feel completely flat, and just wait until it felt right. If I did this, but when I first did it, it was like out of alignment, and then I had to correct it, and then it got flat, it didn't count, I had to do it all over again. And like these things could really get in the way of me living my life. I would like be away to leave work, you know, so I've done a full day's work, I'm away to go home, and OCD's like, hey, you're gonna have a crash on the way home unless you can put your palms perfectly together like this, and you have to wait until it feels right. And so I would try, and I would get it wrong, and I would try again, and I would try again, and I would try again, and 10-15 minutes could pass and I'm still at my place of work. If anybody walked in and saw me, they'd probably be like, what are you doing? I would just be like, nope, nope. I would just have to keep doing it until it felt right. Another thing that I would have to do, so when I stayed in my old flat, I had to lock the door, and then after I locked the door, like every night before bed, I had to lock the door, and then I had to pull down on the door handle, and I had to do it 3 times, click, 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 and it had to sound right and feel right. 2 of them, sound right and feel right. If it didn't sound right, I had to do it again, click, 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 and I had to keep doing this, click, click, click. If it didn't feel right, I could not go to bed. Now, I'm not joking, there would be nights I would be absolutely shattered. I really needed to go to bed. I had to get up early for work in the morning. Like I couldn't be messing about like this, but OCD would make me. Eventually my husband caught on to the fact that I was being really weird at night, and he's like, why do you do that to the door? Like the door's locked, you just go, you check the door's locked, click, you know, and you walk away. And I'm like, no, because I just don't feel like it really is actually locked unless I do click, click, click 3 times, and it has to sound right and it has to feel right. And he was like, just stop it. And I was like, but it's not that simple. Just a bit like the character Liam had said to the character Craig, just stop it. And he's like, well, I can't. The next night I would go to lock the door and my husband would be like, hey, like just check it's locked and walk away. But it was such a strong compulsion within me that I couldn't, I just couldn't. I had to do the click, click, click thing. But I knew that my husband would lecture me, not in a bad way, he wouldn't row at me or tell me off, but I just knew like I was accountable now because he knew my secret and why I did what I did. And I knew that he would just like, in the nicest way, lecture me, like, stop it, you don't need to do this. But he just didn't quite understand that you can't just stop it. So I was like, okay, I need to be able to do something different. If I'm not doing the click, 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 I have to be able to do something else to negate it. Because if I don't do these things before I go to bed with the door, then A, the door is unlocked. Somebody will break in the middle of the night and murder us in our sleep. B, I will die in my sleep. My husband will die in his sleep. Like, all these horrible threats. And I know that sounds morbid and I don't wish any of these things on the people. It's not me that wishes this, it's OCD that like holds these things hostage and makes these threats. And it's horrible, it's really horrible. So I was like, well, if I can't do the click, 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 what can I do? Because I still have to do something to appease OCD. And so I was like, I know, I'll click 3 times. I'll go, well, not as simple as it sounds, because I had to be able, when I did this, it was as if like these fingers had to line up perfectly each time and it just had to feel right. So I'd be like, no, it didn't quite feel right there, so do it again. No, they slipped. And I would have to keep doing this. And it would still take me just as long to get into bed. And like, bear in mind, like I said earlier, I could be absolutely shattered. Like, I just need to just chuck myself on the bed and fall asleep, and I can't do it because I'm standing there. I'm like laughing about this, but it's no laughing matter. It's not funny. I guess this is just my way of like making light of, I don't want to make light of the situation, but just it's my way of dealing with it. But it's a very serious thing and it was very frustrating, and it's just, it really affects your life in such a big way. And then my husband heard one night click, 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 and he was like, what are you doing? And then he realized what I was doing. He's like, stop it. And I was like, man, what am I gonna do now? I can't click, click, click because he knows about that. I can't click, click, click because he knows about that. What can I do? Or like, I would go to leave work and I'd had a long day at work, I had stayed late and I was just needing to go home. You know, maybe somebody was coming that evening, so I needed to be home by a certain time. And I would go to leave. OCD would say, you can't leave because the papers on your desk aren't perfectly aligned. They're like a little bit squint and you have to get them perfectly straight. And until they're all perfectly straight, you're not allowed to leave. So I would spend ages getting it perfectly straight. And maybe the top layer was straight, but the bottom layer was slightly out. So I'd have to pick up a bunch of paper and dun, 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 you know, to get it all aligned, and then I'd put it down. But then when I put it down, a piece of paper moved, like a sheet moved. So I'd have to do it again, and then I'd put it down. And I'd like sit there for ages trying to just perfectly align it. I'd get it perfectly aligned with like one reference point on my desk. For example, the edge of the desk, it would be perfectly aligned with that, but I'd realised it wasn't perfectly aligned with the keyboard. And the reason is because the keyboard's aligned a certain way that's different from everything else because of the layout. So I would have to align it perfectly then with the keyboard, but then it wouldn't be perfectly aligned with the desk. And so I would have this conundrum and this internal conflict where my OCD is like, it's not straight. And I'm like, but I can't do anything about this. I can't. If I make it straight with the desk, it's not straight with the keyboard. If I make it straight with the keyboard, it's not straight with the desk. I'm like, you can't have it both ways. What do you want from me? And then OCD would be like, okay, fine. If you can click your fingers 3 times and it feels right and sounds right, you know, then we will cancel out any threat. And so I would do that. And then OCD would go, but you're still not off the hook. You still have to have it perfectly aligned straight with one of the reference points. Oh my gosh. I'm like, okay, fine. So then I would like sit there and I would take time to perfectly align it and straighten it on the desk until it just felt right or seemed right. And then be like, great, now I can finally go home. And I would go to leave and I would catch the side of the paper, like with the side of my hip or something, like just make it squint. And of course, back to square one, I have to spend ages readjusting until I get it perfectly straight again. And it could like hold me up by quite a bit of time. I could end up going home half an hour late because I have sat here messing around with this piece of paper, making sure it gets perfectly straight because I want to make my OCD happy so that it doesn't hurt people I love, it doesn't hurt me. It just really gets in the way of living life. You're not free. You're always a prisoner to the OCD and what it wants you to do. I used to be in an abusive, controlling relationship, and when I finally broke free, I was like, no man will ever get to tell me how to live my life again. No man will ever have any control over me again. I will never be controlled again. But what I didn't realize until one day was actually, you may have gotten rid of an abusive, controlling partner, but you're now being controlled by OCD. If a person was to tell you the things OCD tells you, if a person was to threaten you or the people that you love the way that OCD threatens it, what would you do? And I'd be like, I'm not gonna do what this person tells me. They can just do one, basically. And I was like, okay, so maybe you need to humanize OCD to help you beat it. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna name my OCD. And I named my OCD Frank. And I was like, next time you get a threat from OCD, instead of saying OCD will hurt somebody I love, I would say Frank will hurt somebody I love. Instead of going OCD says I have to do this, I would say Frank says I have to do this. And I noticed when I would change it from OCD says I have to do this to Frank says I have to do this, I get really angry. Like OCD, I'd be like, okay, whatever you want, I'll do it. Please don't hurt the people I love. Please, please, please. But when I was like, Frank says, I'd be like, you know what? Frank can go do one. I can't use bad language on here, but basically I would say very unsatisfactory words towards Frank. It was a single word and it began with the letter F, and I'd be like, F Frank. I'm not going to be held prisoner. I'm not going to be held his hostage. I would start saying, okay, every time Frank says you have to do this, you just say F Frank, and then you are released from his threats and you can just go about and live your life. And so I started doing this. Frank would go, hey, if you don't do X, Y, or Z, then I am going to hurt somebody you love. And I'd be like, F Frank. Or Frank would say, if you don't have those papers straightly aligned before you leave work, you will go and be in a car crash on the way home because you haven't done what I said. And I'd be like, F Frank, and it would negate the threat, and I'd go and live my life. And for a long time I thought I was like successful. I was like, hey, I finally cracked it. I've got the hang of it. Like finally Frank doesn't control me. I don't have to do certain like patterns to be free of Frank's threats. And it dawned on me, you're not free. Because Frank is very, very clever. He's so clever the way he's done it. See, Frank doesn't care that I say F Frank. It doesn't hurt his feelings or upset him. Frank has still got in his own way, because what I'm doing is I'm still having to do a pattern, I'm still having to do a ritual, I'm still having to do something to negate a threat that Frank gives me. Frank would threaten me and then I would have to say F Frank in order to negate the threat. And that was no different to if Frank would threaten me and then I would have to click my fingers 3 times, or you know, like do the palm thing or the other palm thing. Like it didn't matter. Frank had just very, very cleverly changed the pattern that I had to follow so that I felt like I was in control. I felt like I'd bet Frank, but Frank was still getting what he wanted. I realised that I'm actually not free of Frank, that Frank is very clever, more clever than I had given him credit for, that I had definitely underestimated just how sneaky and sly he is. And yeah, I still am living as Frank's prisoner. I would love to say, here's some great advice on how to beat Frank and how to overcome Frank, but I can't tell you that because honestly, I'm still battling Frank every day. Every day is a battlefield with Frank, and some days I will have victories and some days I will not have victories. Some days Frank will win and some days I will win. Mostly Frank wins. It's still an ongoing thing that I am dealing with, and it's so tiring, it's so frustrating, and it's so stressful. I mean, if you don't suffer from OCD but you know somebody who does, or you're just interested about it, try and imagine that every single day something that you love, someone you love, something or someone that you value, something that's close to you or dear to you, is under attack, is under threat. And unless you follow this taskmaster's desires and wishes. I don't think Frank likes me talking about him because now my battery on my camera has died and I've had to switch to my phone halfway through the conversation. So I'm really sorry about the video quality just now. To get back to what I was saying before, unless you follow this taskmaster's wishes, his desires, his every whim, unless you do exactly as he says, he is going to threaten people and things you love. Imagine dealing with that every single day. And it's not just once a day, this can be multiple times a day. And it can happen at the most inconvenient time and can just be very disruptive. Another example that I have of Frank just being a completely unsavoury character, because again, I can't use bad words, but yeah, another example of him just being completely unsavoury and unfair and just cruel and mean is, you know, I can have like a heavy box and I'll be carrying it under my arm and I'll be balancing it on my hip, and I have to go from point A to point B with this heavy box. And so I'll start walking from point A to point B with a heavy box. And I can get like from point A to point B fine. Like I can manage to carry this heavy box the distance as long as I don't have to keep carrying it for too long as I can get from point A to point B without disruptions or anything holding me up, then I can easily do this. But if I have to hold this box for any more length of time, the box starts to become extremely heavy and I do struggle. So I will pick up the heavy box and I'll be walking from point A to point B. And I will walk past and I will notice that the scissors are on the desk squint, the highlighter is on the desk squint, and the papers aren't aligned and they're not in order. And Frank will say to me, you have to perfectly align the scissors, perfectly align the highlighter, perfectly align the paper, and organise them into order while holding onto the box. You are not allowed to put the box down to do these things. This is just like so challenging because I have to hold the box and keep balancing it, and then with my other free arm I have to adjust the highlighter, I have to adjust the scissors, I have to adjust the paper, and then I have to put it in date order, all doing it with one arm and one hand and then still holding this heavy box. And so I will do that even though it's straight, it just doesn't feel right, so I have to keep doing it over and 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 over again until it feels right. Meanwhile, more and more time is passing, I'm still holding this heavy box. It's getting heavier and heavier and heavier by the minute. I just want to put it down and Frank says no. Eventually I get done dealing with Frank. I finally make him happy. Frank tells me that if I don't do these things and I just ignore him and carry on carrying the box down the stairs, then something bad will happen to me, like I will fall down the stairs and break my neck or break my leg, or I will drop the box, and that this will only happen if I don't do what Frank says. But if I do what Frank says, then he will release me from this threat, he will release me from this harm. But by this point, the box is so heavy and it's just not an ideal situation to be in. Inside my car, the little door cards where you can like store things, Frank does not like me having things stored in there. He's very neat, he's very clutter free, very tidy. He doesn't like it. So if I go and get fuel and I get a receipt and I put it in the side pocket, Frank will tell me that I will have a crash on the way home and get seriously hurt unless I remove that receipt from the side pocket and put it somewhere else out of sight, put it in my pocket or something. The only thing that Frank will allow me to have in the side pocket of my car is my demister. I have no idea why Frank is happy for me to have my demister in the side pocket, but that's the only thing that he will allow. Anything else is in there and he will be like, you're gonna have an accident unless you remove that. Sometimes my husband will borrow my car. He likes to have bottles of water or milkshake or drinks, so he will leave his drink in the side pocket, and I will get into my car the next time I'm away to use it, and then I will find like the drink that he's left behind, and Frank just has a meltdown and he's like, you have to get rid of that, you have to get rid of that, you can't have that in there. It's just ridiculous. Frank will be annoying to the point that he doesn't like me to have anything sitting on the passenger seat. He's kind of relaxed his view on this. I don't know why he's relaxed his view on this. The other week, just last weekend, he allowed me to have something on the passenger seat of my car. But up until last weekend, this was not allowed. It was just, it wasn't going to happen. If I had like a bag or a jacket, it had to go in the boot. I wasn't allowed it on the back seat, I wasn't allowed it in the passenger seat, it had to go in the boot. And if I didn't follow these rules, guess what? I was gonna have a car crash on the way home. I think Frank really hates me, to be honest. He's just so horrible. But this is like what you live with. If he's not threatening me and my safety, he's threatening the safety of the people I love. And like I said before, even though you know that logically you don't have control over whether or not somebody lives or dies, Frank's argument just instills such a fear in you that you're like, just can't take that chance. What if I don't do what Frank says and then they do die, or I die, and then Frank's like, well, see, told you, you should have listened to me. Like, do you really want to take that chance? And I just can't take that chance. So yeah, this is what it's like living with OCD, and thank you so much if you've made it to the end of the video and you're still watching. And if you're watching because you want to better understand somebody that you love who's going through this, I think it's a great thing that you're wanting to understand and you're wanting to learn about it. And if you're living with OCD, I just want to say you're not alone. You're not a weirdo. There are more people than you think that are living with this, and mental illnesses do not discriminate. There's nothing wrong with you because you are experiencing this. It's not because of anything that you have or haven't done. It's not because you're not a nice person. Whatever lies that it tells you, just know it doesn't discriminate. Even rich people, even celebrities can have this. Normal run of the day people can have this. People who have had good lives can have this. People who've had bad lives can have this. Like, mental illness does not discriminate. You are not alone in this. You are not a weirdo. There is nothing wrong with you. You are perfectly fine, and you are one strong, I can't swear, you're one very, very strong individual, because you have to battle OCD every single day. And unless you are living with OCD, you're not going to understand just how much strength that really takes. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep going. You're doing amazing. You're doing fantastic. And we will get through this. And if anybody has any tips for how to beat OCD, or things that have helped them when OCD comes a-calling with his ridiculous list of threats and hostage holding situations, if you have any tips for me, I would be so grateful to hear them from you, because I would just love to be free of this one day. One day I would just love to be free. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.